to Forgotten TV. I am your podcast ghost, Chris Cooling. This chilling broadcast is kept undead by the lifeblood of listeners like you. If you wish to join the circle of the cursed, you may do so through Patreon or PayPal, where new producers rise from the shadows to keep things going. Tonight's program has been conjured by the Sinister Six: Joshua Driscoll, Doc Pinko, K.L. Young, Kenny Siegel, Tony Cook, and James Bellinger. And should you dare to support the podcast through alternate means, dark paths await. Affiliate links lurk in the show notes and at forgotten.tv, waiting for those brave enough to click. My undying gratitude for keeping Forgotten TV from returning to the grave. Ah ha 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 ha.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Perhaps no show in the television anthology genre is more well-known than Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone, originally airing on CBS from 1959 to 1964. Yes, for 5 seasons, Serling presented standalone tales of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, in which ordinary people would encounter extraordinary, perhaps unsettling events, often culminating in a startling twist and offering a quietly moral message. But before The Twilight Zone opened this door to another dimension, television and radio had already been whispering in the dark for decades. Through chilling anthologies like Lights Out, The Inner Sanctum, and Suspense, and a few you almost certainly have never heard of. So pull up a chair, dim the lights, and let's take a look back at the chilling trail that led from radio's haunted airwaves to the eerie glow of 1981's Darkroom on this episode of Forgotten TV. The birth of radio drama. Radio drama dates back to 1921, just 1 year after radio itself emerged as a broadcast medium. Previously only available as hobbyist kits, think homebrew computers in the mid-1970s, consumer radio receivers first became available in the U.S. in September 1920, when Pittsburgh's Joseph Horn department store began selling pre-built sets. These early radios could pick up transmissions from Westinghouse engineer Frank Conrad's amateur station, 8XK, broadcasting from his garage, a term borrowed from agriculture, referring to the casting of seeds in a field, since radio at the time was considered a two-way, point-to-point medium. These units from Joseph Horn sold for $10, about $160 today, and went on sale even before Westinghouse had received the first commercial radio license for station KDKA. A sidebar here. Instead of endlessly reading news and repeating his call letters and location, Conrad began playing gramophone records to give his voice a rest. Listeners with their own transmitters started requesting specific songs over the air, while those with just receivers would phone or write in. In doing so, Conrad became radio's first DJ, pioneering a new way for audiences to interact with radio broadcasts. Naturally, the first ever commercial broadcast followed shortly after, on November 2nd, 1920, when KDKA aired the results of the Harding-Cox presidential election. Soon, there were 4 radio stations across the country, and already a few thousand receivers out there to pick up these new signals. Less than a year later, KDKA would make history again with A Rural Line on Education. Not only was this the first radio drama ever broadcast, but the first dramatic piece written specifically for radio. The play itself was simple, a telephone conversation between 2 farmers, occasionally interrupted by an operator and a few nosy neighbors trying to use the line. But its impact was enormous. This modest experiment proved that radio could do more than report the news or play music. It could tell stories. It wasn't long before radio stations across the country began to follow KDKA's lead. In September 1922, WGY in Schenectady, New York, began airing weekly stage adaptations performed by their in-house troupe, the WGY Players. Just 2 months later, WLW in Cincinnati joined in, and by the spring of 1923, stations in Philadelphia and Los Angeles were not only broadcasting plays, but producing entirely original material, even holding contests to discover new scriptwriters. By the late 1920s, the airwaves were alive with drama of every kind: comedy, soap operas, mysteries, westerns, suspense, and so on. Many of these were in an anthology format, where each broadcast told a self-contained story, with characters that did not carry over from one episode to the next. This boom in storytelling coincided with an explosion in the medium itself. Those 4 pioneering stations of 1920 multiplied to 30 by 1922, and an incredible 556 just a year later. And those few thousand early radio receivers grew to over 100 million by the end of the decade. While that growth might have happened anyway, it's fair to say that A Rural Line on Education and the countless programs it inspired helped prove that radio wasn't just a marvel of technology, it was a stage for the imagination. With radio now firmly established as America's favorite storytelling medium, it was ready for its next evolution. As the lights dimmed and the hour grew late, a new kind of voice crept onto the airwaves, whispering tales not of love or laughter, but of terror.
The Witch's Tale and the Birth of Radio Horror.
Likely the first attempt to bring a horror anthology to radio, The Witch's Tale debuted in 1931 on New York's WOR. Created, written, and directed by Alonzo Dean Cole, the show was hosted by Old Nancy, called the Witch of Salem. Alongside her black cat, Satan, she introduced a different chilling story each week. Adelaide Fitz-Allen provided the original voice of Old Nancy until her death in 1935, after which other performers stepped into the role. The program primarily featured original stories, although a few episodes adapted works from the literary canon, and it enjoyed broadcasts on the Mutual Radio Network, as well as in syndication. Old Nancy's character would later inspire the Old Witch, who introduced stories in Bill Gaines' The Haunt of Fear comics during the 1950s, cementing her place as an early icon of American horror. But did you know that 1931 also saw the debut of a horror anthology on television? The Television Ghost first aired on August 27, 1931, on Columbia's experimental mechanical television station W2XAB in New York City. George Kelting served as the show's ghostly host, portraying the spirits of murder victims who recounted their own deaths in 15-minute tales. For each broadcast, Kelting would don white makeup and drape a white sheet over his head, addressing the camera directly as he told the story. Because of its live, narratively driven format and obvious experimental nature, the show's style was actually closer to that of a radio program than the television dramas we would come to know. While viewers in the Northeast might be able to see the visual broadcast, listeners across the country could hear the ghost in his stories told on the CBS radio network. Not only was this the first horror anthology broadcast on television, but it also seems to be the first dramatic series altogether, predating the drama series Character Slants by nearly 10 months. It was also the first series to give TV viewers a Halloween episode, as noted by an article in the Brooklyn Standard Union, running on October 30th of that year. Halloween will be duly celebrated by Columbia's television station W2XAB tomorrow, when the television ghost, unidentified mystery character, takes things in his own hands to thrill and chill lookers in and listeners in. The television ghost, who stalks the radio waves regularly on Tuesday nights, will be given free rein of the visual studios and will demonstrate, among other things, how one ghost can become 3 ghosts without a magician in the picture. Kelting, made up in character, evidently gave office workers at the CBS building occasional frights. Reportedly, he was causing some commotion around the CBS building's 23rd floor. Garbed in a sheet, his hands and face covered with a ghastly white makeup. He is far from a treat to the neurotic. To date, he has popped around corners to frighten one soprano, one supposedly brave lightweight fighter, and one of Columbia's porters, who dropped his broom and departed at excessive speed. Apart from what I've related in this segment, no scripts or synopses of this groundbreaking program survive, nor were any episodes audio recorded or filmed to preserve them. The only thing that survives are grainy old publicity photos of Kelting in costume, adding to the creep factor. According to newspaper listings, the television ghost departed the airwaves in August of 1932. But radio horror was far from dead. By 1936, it found a voice in Lights Out, a chilling favorite of none other than Rod Serling.
Ironized Yeast presents
Lights Out, everybody.
It is later than you think.
This is Arch Obler bringing you another in our series of stories of the unusual. And once again we caution you, these Lights Out stories are definitely not for the timid soul. So we tell you calmly and very sincerely, if you frighten easily, turn off your radio now. But if you're fascinated by the mysterious, the fantastic, the unearthly, then anticipate chills in our story of Poltergeist.
Out of the static of late-night radio, Lights Out emerged. First as a strange midnight experiment from Willis Cooper in 1934, daring listeners to turn off their lights and face their fears. When Arch Obler took the reins 2 years later, his dark imagination transformed it into something more. Not just horror for shock's sake, but deeply human stories, where terror often came from within. For more than a decade, Lights Out haunted the airwaves and helped define American radio horror. Premiering on January 3, 1934, on Chicago's NBC station WENR, Lights Out was one of the earliest horror and suspense programs on radio. Initially just 15 minutes long, it was conceived as a midnight mystery serial, meant to counter-program against other stations that would be airing music. The series ran for a year before creator Willis Cooper dropped it in early 1935 to ease his growing workload. But listener demand brought it right back. By that summer, Lights Out had gone national on the NBC network, airing on Wednesday nights. With its revival, though, came a shift in format. The serialized concept was dropped in favor of self-contained tales of crime, suspense, and the supernatural. And how the stories were shockingly grisly for their time, with characters buried alive, eaten, skinned, vaporized in a vat of molten steel, devoured by giant amoebas, torn apart by robots, tortured, beaten, and decapitated. Lights Out quickly earned a reputation for its stomach-churning realism, helped by a symphony of gruesome sound effects. Adhesive tape pulled apart simulated the sound of skin ripping. A chicken leg could stand in for a torn human limb. A raw egg dropping onto a plate would mimic an eye being gouged out, while poured corn syrup doubled as blood. Cleavered cabbages and cantaloupes stood in for beheadings, and pencils or spare ribs were snapped to simulate broken bones. For the sound of a hand being crushed, a lemon smashed on an anvil with a hammer did the trick. It was Lights Out that truly set the bar for radio horror, paving the way for every gruesome sound, spine-chilling twist, and late-night fright that followed. In 1936, Willis Cooper left Lights Out for a position in Hollywood, and the show's eerie legacy fell into the hands of a young writer-producer named Arch Oboler. Under Oboler, Lights Out evolved from pure shock and gore into something deeper. Stories that mixed nightmare imagery with psychological themes, stream of consciousness narration, and social commentary. But Oboler's stories weren't just about monsters or mayhem. Episodes like The Bathysphere, Oxychloride X, and the now legendary Chicken Heart turned horror inward, exploring guilt, ambition, and madness, earning Lights Out both critical praise and a loyal audience that tuned in every Wednesday at midnight to be terrified all over again. Under Oboler's guidance, Lights Out became the thinking listener's horror show, paving the way for later anthology masters like Rod Serling. The series enjoyed several revivals throughout the 1940s and ultimately made the leap to television with a set of live specials in 1946 and an NBC series running from 1949 to 1952, initially hosted by Jack LaRue. An additional sidebar, if you will. Recall that in 1936, at the height of initial popularity of Lights Out, Willis Cooper resigned from NBC Radio and moved to Hollywood. There he worked as a screenwriter, scripting films in the Mr. Moto series, as well as the 1939 film Son of Frankenstein. Here, it is Cooper we have to thank for introducing a character trope that entered the public consciousness. Here, appearing as a blacksmith with a broken neck and twisted back as the result of a botched hanging. This was the character of Igor, played by Bela Lugosi. By 1944's House of Frankenstein, the lab assistant, this time called Daniel, played by J. Carrol Naish, was given a proper hunchback. 1953's House of Wax also had an Igor as assistant, this time a deaf-mute played by Charles Bronson. Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine likely kept the Igor character in the public consciousness, as did Frankenstein horror comic adaptations of the 1970s. 1974's Young Frankenstein,
that's Frankenstein,
likely cemented the trope of a hunchback named Igor playing assistant to mad scientists from then on. Once Lights Out proved that horror could captivate a national audience, smaller regional stations soon began conjuring their own eerie anthologies, each with its own flavor of fright.
Now, The Hermit.
The Hermit's Cave in 1937 also invited listeners to turn out your lights and enter the shadowy world of its gleefully ghoulish host, a cackling hermit who promised
ghost stories, weird stories, and murders too. The hermit knows of them all. Turn out your lights.
Clearly inspired by the success of Arch Oboler's Lights Out, this long-running program delivered macabre tales from within the hermit's gloomy cavern each week. Created by Mr. and Mrs. Eric Howlett of Detroit, The Hermit's Cave debuted on station WJR before being picked up by stations in other cities, with its West Coast version produced by none other than a young William Conrad, only 22 when he started work on this show. Over its 7-year run, the show reportedly aired more than 800 episodes, making it one of radio's most prolific and enduring chillers.
Dark fantasy.
Dark Fantasy was one of radio's most imaginative and eerie anthology series, blending elements of science fiction, fantasy, and the supernatural into tales that defied easy classification. Created by Scott Bishop and originating from station WKY in Oklahoma City in 1941, the show began as a local production before being picked up for national distribution just 8 weeks later on the NBC radio network. With a relatively short run of 31 episodes, each story opened with a haunting organ theme and the promise of stories of strange adventure, the weird, the unusual, the terrifying. Suspense became one of radio's longest-running and most celebrated anthology dramas, airing on CBS from 1940 to 1962 and racking up more than 900 episodes. Billed as radio's outstanding theater of thrills, the series offered meticulously crafted tales of mystery, murder, and psychological tension. What truly set Suspense apart was its pedigree. Not only were the stories tightly written and expertly produced, but they also featured some of Hollywood's biggest names, including Orson Welles, Cary Grant, Lucille Ball, and Agnes Moorehead. Each week, the familiar opening signaled a journey into fear itself. We invite you to enjoy stories that keep you in suspense. Though it occasionally flirted with science fiction or the supernatural, the series' greatest strength lie in its grounded human dramas, proving that terror often hides not in monsters, but in the minds of men.
Inner Sanctum Mysteries, starring Ann Seymour and Myron McCormick. Brought to you by the makers of Carter's Little Liver Pills, the best friend to your sunny disposition.
Then came The Inner Sanctum Mysteries, which ran from 1941 to 1952 and was produced by the prolific Hyman Brown. This one broke from the deadly serious tone of its contemporaries, introducing tales of mystery, terror, and suspense, with sly, macabre humor, courtesy of its pun-loving host, Raymond Johnson, who would introduce himself. The creaking door, the spooky melodramatic organ music, and Johnson's sardonic farewell, "Pleasant dreams, became radio horror hallmarks for 526 thrilling episodes. Early on in the run, Universal picked up the screen rights to the series and cranked out 6 features, and the show briefly made it to television with a 39-episode syndicated run in 1954.
And now, stay tuned for the program that is rated tops in popularity for a longer period of time than any other West Coast program in radio history. The Signal Oil program, The Whistler.
The Whistler, airing on CBS's West Coast network from 1942 to 1955, produced nearly 700 episodes, one of the more prolific runs in radio thriller history. It added a distinctive twist to the anthology format, with its unseen narrator whose chilling introduction set the stage each week. I am the Whistler, and I know many things, for I walk by night. I know many strange tales hidden in the hearts of men and women who have stepped into the shadows. Yes, I know the nameless terrors of which they dare not speak. Much like The Shadow a decade earlier, the Whistler was inexplicably an unseen observer who would watch evil deeds unfold and then comment on the guilty fools that committed such acts. The show even got adapted into a film series for Columbia Pictures by none other than William Castle, and the show also later made the leap to television with a brief syndicated series.
The Weird Circle.
The Weird Circle, in 1943, took a distinctly literary approach to radio horror, adapting classic tales from authors such as Charles Dickens, Robert Louis Stevenson, and, naturally, Edgar Allan Poe. Produced at RCA Studios in New York and heard over the Mutual Network, the series ran for 78 episodes. Each broadcast began abruptly, without a host or framing narration, dropping listeners straight into the story. Production values were modest, with sparse music and minimal effects, but The Weird Circle relied on strong performances and timeless storytelling to evoke its eerie atmosphere. Then there was The Mysterious Traveler in 1943 on the Mutual Radio Network, which quickly became one of radio's most compelling excursions into the unknown. Each week, host Maurice Tarplin's ominous voice beckoned listeners aboard.
This is the Mysterious Traveler, inviting you to join me on another journey into the realm of the strange and the terrifying. I hope you will enjoy the trip, that it will thrill you a little and chill you a little. So settle back and get a good grip on your nerves, if you can.
Over the course of 370 episodes, the series delivered polished tales of suspense and crime with generous doses of horror and science fiction. The scripts came from Robert Arthur and David Kogan, the same duo behind The Strange Dr. Weird, a shorter companion program featuring the same eerie narrator. The Mysterious Traveler was successful enough to inspire both a pulp magazine and comic book adaptations, one of which featured early work by Joe Gill and Steve Ditko. The radio stories themselves left a lasting mark on listeners. Author Harlan Ellison recalled being utterly spellbound by an episode called 5 Miles Down, a memory vivid enough that he directed a recreation of it more than 50 years later at a 2004 convention. This is by no means a complete list of the eerie, thrilling, and downright chilling programs that haunted the airwaves during radio's golden age of the 1930s and 40s. But shows like these firmly established the horror and suspense anthology in the public imagination, keeping millions of listeners glued to their sets. Lights dimmed, hearts racing, imaginations running wild. And when the next great medium came along, it was only natural that television, too, would step in to the shadows.
Tales of the supernatural, twisted minds, and murders.
As sure as my name is Boris Karloff.
It's Boris Karloff's Thriller, tomorrow night at 9. Then at 10, chilling suspense, unbelievable endings. All part of Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
I'd like to take you on a conducted tour of the most bizarre little salon where the pictures are out of this world.
Catch the supernatural power of Thriller at 9 and Night Gallery at 10 tomorrow night on WPWR-TV Channel 60, Chicago's power station.
Television discovers the dark side.
In addition to the direct television adaptations of radio favorites like Suspense, Inner Sanctum, The Whistler, and yes, even Lights Out, the new medium soon began spinning its own tales of terror and tension. Television proved to be the perfect successor to radio's theater of the mind, now bringing those voices and horrors to life before viewers' very eyes. By 1949, television had finally emerged from its experimental infancy to become a true commercial broadcast medium, though still very much in its early days. One of the first ventures into televised horror and suspense was starring Boris Karloff, later retitled Mystery Playhouse, starring Boris Karloff, a short-lived ABC series that bridged the worlds of radio and TV. Airing in tandem as both a radio and television show on consecutive nights, each with its own version, the series presented strange, exciting, and bizarre tales, hosted by and occasionally starring Karloff. Though it lasted only 13 episodes, what we'd now call a half season, and was likely performed live, it carried forward the macabre spirit of Lights Out, even adapting a few stories by Arch Oboler himself. Sadly, the episodes are not believed to have been filmed via kinescope, thus none are known to exist. But several of the radio broadcasts remain, partially preserving this early experiment in bringing horror from the airwaves to the screen. By the mid-1950s, television had matured into America's primary mass medium, and no one loomed larger in its shadowy corners than Alfred Hitchcock. Each week on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, audiences were greeted by the unmistakable strains of Charles Gounod's Funeral March of a Marionette, as Hitchcock stepped into a line-drawn caricature of his own profile and dryly intoned, "Good evening." Even for those who've never seen an episode, that macabre tune remains forever linked to his name. The show delivered half-hour morality plays, often filled with deception, murder, and poetic justice, often concluding with Hitchcock's sardonic take on the story, blending sophistication with suspense for an incredible 10 seasons across 2 networks. This series elevated the television anthology to an art form and quietly set the stage for a certain playwright who would soon redefine the genre entirely. That certain playwright was, of course, Rod Serling, a master craftsman of television drama who transformed the anthology format into something both philosophical and profoundly human, perhaps in a way no other writer has done since. Serling, a Jewish writer raised on pulp magazines and the classic radio anthologies we've been considering, was a paratrooper in World War II, seeing combat in the Pacific Theater, in both New Guinea and the Philippines, which would profoundly shape his worldview and political sensibilities for the rest of his life. These influences came together in The Twilight Zone, which began its 5-season run on CBS in 1959, inviting viewers to step into a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. This half-hour anthology presented stories where ordinary people confronted extraordinary circumstances and moral dilemmas. Some episodes remain etched in our collective memory. Eye of the Beholder explored societal standards of beauty with a haunting finale. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet showed William Shatner's terror at seeing a creature on the wing of an airplane. To Serve Man delivered one of the most delicious twists in TV history. Living Doll brought Talkie Tina, a seemingly innocent toy, to life, to the terror of Telly Savalas. And Time Enough at Last depicted Burgess Meredith's ironic solitude after surviving a nuclear disaster. By portraying fantastic events, Serling wove science fiction, fantasy, and horror into unforgettable half-hour parables that slyly allowed him to add social commentary in ways network censors would never have allowed on conventional television shows. This firmly solidified The Twilight Zone as the defining anthology of the television age.
We assure you, my friends, this is a thriller.
The year after The Twilight Zone debuted, Boris Karloff returned to television with Thriller on NBC. With a full hour to tell its tales, the series gave its stories room to breathe and build atmosphere. At first, Thriller focused on crime and psychological suspense. But after cycling through 2 producers, William Fry took the reins and guided the show toward far, darker terrain. Suddenly, fog-shredded graveyards, creaking mansions, and gothic revenge stories became the order of the day, populated by vengeful spirits, witches, and things best left buried. Karloff himself introduced each episode with grave elegance, often assuring us, "As sure as my name is Boris Karloff, this is a thriller." Though it ran for only 2 seasons, Thriller earned a devoted cult following, remembered as the most atmospheric and genuinely frightening of the early television horror anthologies.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
If Thriller was television's gothic heart, perhaps you could say The Outer Limits was its cerebral nerve. Premiering on ABC in 1963, the series was the brainchild of Leslie Stevens, with Joseph Stefano, fresh from writing Hitchcock's Psycho, as producer and principal writer. Together, they brought a distinctly cinematic and psychological sensibility to television science fiction. There was no on-screen host. Instead, the audience was guided each week by Vic Perrin as the disembodied control voice, as we just heard. Each episode offered a self-contained story, often mixing horror with sci-fi elements. And at the center of each story was the bear, the producer's nickname for the monster or creature that anchored this week's tale. But unlike typical TV monsters, these bears were often tragic, misunderstood figures, victims of human ambition or science gone too far. Still, some were genuinely frightening for the time. As early as the third episode, The Architects of Fear, the Thetan alien's appearance proved so disturbing that some ABC affiliates blacked out its reveal entirely, while others delayed the broadcast until after the late news. Other episodes gave us the Ebonites in Nightmare, the obscenely large, bugged-out eyes of the mutant, and of course, the human-faced giant ants of the Zanti Misfits. A disagreement between ABC and Stevens resulted in the network bringing in a new showrunner and a shift in direction, leading to the early cancellation of the series halfway through a second season. Still, The Outer Limits had expanded what thrilling and sometimes terrifying science fiction could achieve on television, paving the way for others to follow.
Venture into the strange and bizarre world of Rod Serling's Night Gallery for 60 unequaled minutes of eerie and ghostly tales. Journey into the incredible Night Gallery.
By the dawn of the 1970s, entertainment in general had entered a darker, more experimental phase. A perfect environment for Rod Serling to return to the realm of the uncanny. Just 6 years after the Twilight Zone ended, Serling unveiled Night Gallery on NBC, an anthology devoted specifically to horror and the macabre. Each episode was framed by Serling himself as the curator of a dimly lit museum of nightmarish paintings, introducing each tale as a picture from the Night Gallery. The 1969 pilot film set the tone with 3 chilling stories, including Eyes, a directorial debut by a young Steven Spielberg, and starring Joan Crawford as a blind woman willing to kill to regain her sight. From there, Night Gallery explored tales of guilt, revenge, madness, and the supernatural, often with an ironic or tragic sting. In a format previously unseen on network TV, 2 or 3 segments of various lengths would be presented over the 1-hour runtime. But while Night Gallery was Serling's creation and originally bore his narrative voice, he quickly found himself sidelined from creative control. At the behest of NBC, producer Jack Laird steered the show toward broader, pulpier fare, inserting short vignettes called blackouts, usually offering humorous one-joke tales on classic monsters. These lighter stories clashed with Serling's more literary and socially conscious vision. Serling fought to keep the tone consistent with his original conception, eerie morality plays exploring guilt, death, and the supernatural. But the network and producer increasingly overrode his input, going so far as to reject scripts that he had submitted. In later interviews, Serling lamented that Night Gallery had become a place where my paintings were being vandalized. By the 3rd season, NBC shortened the show to a half hour and moved it from midweek to Sunday night at 10/9 Central, and the writing was on the wall. Serling had had it. I'm f***ing furious. These people are taking what could have been a good series, and they're so commercializing it, it's not going to be commercial. The show was put on hiatus, then canceled altogether before a full season complement of episodes. Despite these behind-the-scenes tensions, in early episodes when the show leaned into atmosphere and dread, it produced some of the most haunting moments of early 70s television, with the twisted portraits delivering stories of moral reckoning rendered in shadow and candlelight. But the show's legacy grew even more tangled in rerun syndication. When Night Gallery was prepared for reruns, hour-long episodes were chopped into half-hour segments, with scenes cut or rearranged to fit the shorter format. To expand the episode count, Universal packaged in edited versions of The Sixth Sense, a completely unrelated paranormal drama series with Gary Collins, marketing them as Night Gallery episodes. As a result, audiences encountered a confusing mix of genuine, although edited, gallery tales and rebranded psychic mysteries, leading to decades of fan frustration for both series and misunderstanding about what stories actually belonged to Serling's show. By the early 1980s, it had been several years since original Night Gallery broadcasts had flickered their last unsettling images across television screens. The horror anthology, once a staple of radio and early TV, had largely vanished, replaced by cop shows, sitcoms, and action series. Yet the small screen never fully turned its back on the macabre. Throughout the 1970s, made-for-TV chillers like Gargoyles, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, and Trilogy of Terror. Not to mention the cult favorite Kolchak, the Night Stalker, proved that audiences still craved things that go bump in the night. So when the early 1980s rolled around, perhaps the horror anthology was overdue for a revival. And so, 50 years after The Witch's Tale first terrified radio listeners, ABC, in need of a last-minute addition to its 1981 primetime schedule, returned to this well with a hastily assembled concept that would become Darkroom.
Your own. Maybe one you've never seen before. You feel it. Something evil. You run, but there's no escape. Nowhere to turn. You feel something beckoning you, drawing you into the darkness, to the terror that awaits you in the Darkroom.
Darkroom was a last-minute addition to an already delayed 1981 ABC fall schedule. That year's 3-month Writers Guild of America strike pushed back production across the networks, leading to later fall series debuts. I find no record of Darkroom even being in development until October 12th, when ABC President Anthony D. Thermopoulos hastily announced programming changes, including a new Universal Television anthology to air Fridays at 9/8 Central, beginning November 27th. The addition of Darkroom, along with the accompanying scheduling moves ABC has made, will serve to strengthen our fall schedule. Darkroom will bring to television a genre for which there is obviously a growing appetite. The sudden need for an hour of new programming came after new nighttime soap King's Crossing, originally planned for fall, was bumped to mid-season for retooling. With little more than 6 weeks to spare, ABC scrambled to fill the gap, announcing only that Darkroom would be a horror anthology. Within 3 days, James Coburn was announced as host for the series, and production began on what was essentially a crash-assembled series intended to capture the eerie appeal of Night Gallery for a new decade. The concept definitely echoed Serling's earlier series, a hosted anthology framed around a unifying motif, this time the slow revelation of photographic images in a darkroom. Yet, from the start, Darkroom faced the same challenge that haunted many anthology series before, namely budget constraints and network meddling. Still, in its brief run, the series managed to deliver a few chilling, clever stories. But enough talk. It's time to step inside and face what awaits in the Darkroom. Episode 1, November 27th, 1981.
The man I talked to on the telephone last night is not Arthur Desmond.
He's you. You sure you're not seeing spooks in your closet?
Take the face, the voice, the soul. It's monstrous.
You can keep your soul. All we want is your externals.
You shouldn't have come in here.
No!
Good evening, friends of the inner sanctum.
This is insane.
This radio could be tuned into the past.
You're talking about changing history.
Closed circuit.
In a world where image is everything, aging newsman Greg Conway begins to suspect that longtime colleague Arthur has been replaced by something not quite alive. When the TV network confirms Arthur has been replaced with a digital double, Greg gets offered the same retirement plan. But he discovers there's one condition they never mentioned. Guest stars Robert Webber, Mary Fran, John Randolph, and Richard Anderson. Written by Alan Brennert, based on a story by Carter Schultz. Brennert had several credits each for Wonder Woman, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, and later Simon & Simon, the 1985 Twilight Zone revival, L.A. Law, and the 1995 Outer Limits revival series. The concept presented in this episode seems even more relevant today. What once played as speculative fiction now mirrors a world where generative AI can not only crank out the 13-episode story arc for your Netflix show pitch meeting, but also conjure a lifelike avatar to host your YouTube channel. We now have tools capable of producing convincing video deepfakes, making anyone appear to say or do things they never have. Humanity is only beginning to grapple with what that means. The recent debut of AI performers like Tilly Norwood, billed as the first artificial actress ready for full productions, suggests that closed circuit's imagined future has quietly arrived. Fittingly, the machine that simulated the reporters in the episode was called the Matrix Box, a name that now sounds less like a science fiction movie and more like prophecy.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
When Charlie's young son builds a crystal radio, it somehow begins receiving broadcasts from 1942. At first, it's great fun with Tom Mix and the Inner Sanctum, until Charlie intercepts a Morse code message from a Nazi spy linked to the sinking of his father's ship. When he tries to send a message back, the static of history answers in a way he never expected. Written by Simon Muntner. This one had shades of the 2000 Jim Caviezel Dennis Quaid film Frequency. This was the only episode contributed by Muntner, an ex-advertising executive turned novelist and TV writer, whose IMDb is evidently incomplete, as his 2005 obituary notes he wrote more than 400 TV episodes, including MASH, The Feather and Father Gang, The San Pedro Beach Bombs, The American Girls, T.J. Hooker, and Webster, on the last three of which he was also a producer. Episode 2, December 4th, 1981.
Man makes the life he settles for.
Suppose you've got a chance to change it.
Don't seem right, burying him in plastic.
We got no time for frills.
No! Look out! My younger daughter is firmly convinced that you are a vampire.
I won't bite.
You know vampires never come out during the daytime. Stay away from him, Nance.
The boogeyman will get you.
Every horror fan dreams of spotting a real monster. For teenage Dee Dee, that monster is Phil, the newly resurfaced old family friend who never seems to be around in daylight. She's certain he's a vampire. Older sister Nancy isn't so sure, at first. But she finds what's waiting in the dark isn't a vampire at all, but something else entirely. Guest stars Helen Hunt, Quinn Cummings, and Randy Powell. Written by Robert Bloch, who would deliver 3 segments of Darkroom, and whose credits go back to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Thriller, and of course the original 1959 horror novel, Psycho. Long before his film and TV credits, he began his career at age 17 as a contributor to pulp magazines like Weird Tales. He was a protege of H.P. Lovecraft and initially specialized in cosmic horror, contributing to the Cthulhu mythos. However, Bloch later evolved toward a unique style, specializing in horror stories with a psychological approach, believing that the real horror is not in the shadows, but in that twisted little world inside our own skulls. A production note, the audio mix is terrible on this one, as if they didn't get good audio coverage during filming. Many times it was hard to make out exactly what actors were saying. I'm wondering if this was a result of the rushed production.
Uncle George.
After the death of Uncle George, middle-aged couple Bert and Margot Haskell devise a scheme to keep his disability checks coming by hiring homeless look-alike Dixie Weeks to take his place in exchange for room, board, and 3 squares a day. For Dixie, it's a bargain he can't refuse. But he'll soon discover that some bargains are struck in the dark and paid for in ways he could never imagine. Guest stars Claude Akins, June Lockhart, and Dub Taylor. Written by Darkroom producer Peter S. Fischer, who is credited with 4 Darkroom segments. Fischer also created TV series The Eddie Capra Mysteries, Black's Magic, The Law and Harry McGraw, as well as Murder, She Wrote. Unfortunately, this second airing sat in the bottom 5 of the weekly ratings, only 1 away from being the lowest-rated show on TV. This, of course, did not bode well for the future of the series. As AP TV writer Fred Rothenberg noted, "Darkroom is bound to die." Episode 3, December 11th, 1981.
You used her.
It wasn't that way between us, I swear.
If you're gonna play it soldier, boy, you best learn to play it right.
You sit here night after night, filling him full of stories, most of them lies.
Ben! There's a lot more there than I bought you now. I want to know where you got them.
Every day there's more. I can't stop them.
Oh, my God.
Needlepoint.
A slick city pimp believes he's ended the threat when he kills the voodoo woman in the woods who's been targeting him in revenge for her dead granddaughter. But the voodoo doll is left behind with the old woman's dog, which turns out to be a tragic mistake. This very short segment guest starred Esther Roll and Lawrence Hilton Jacobs. Written by Violet Pulbrook. This is the only credit I can find for this person, and as she is not listed as a writer in the WGA directory, I assume this was a pseudonym. Also, the title of this segment in the WGA listings is Here a Pain, There a Pain.
Siege of 31 August.
Neil, an injured Vietnam veteran turned farmer who committed atrocities during the war, fights with his wife over their young son Ben going to military school. He buys Ben a military playset, which seems to magically grow overnight, and Ben reports that the toy soldiers are alive, and they do not forget what happened in Vietnam. Guest stars Ronnie Cox, Gail Strickland, and Patrick Brennan. Written by Peter S. Fischer. Yes, it had only been 6 years following the end of the Vietnam War, and America was still working through its feelings about this conflict, and the subject would show up again and again in our media. The climax of this episode has to be seen to be believed, and the effects range from very good for television when it came to the miniature soldiers to somewhat less than convincing with the flying helicopter models. If only the story had given us more information to go on, as the Vietnam backstory was quite vague, we might know exactly how to feel about Neil as a character. This story, though, bears a number of striking similarities, to say the least, to the Stephen King story Battleground, first published in 1972. Battleground was officially adapted to a teleplay by Richard Christian Matheson for the TNT series Nightmares and Dreamscapes in 2006. Episode 4, December 18th, 1981.
Tonight, 2 chilling stories from the Darkroom.
You never spend that money! I'll come after you! Who reached down? Down!
Once Lamont Tremaine applied his makeup, he would actually become that character. He was the man of 100 faces.
These guys are gonna kill me! No!
A quiet funeral.
When small-time hood Marty Vetch makes off with 50 grand and leaves his ex-partner for dead, he skips down to Vegas with his girl for a fresh start. But when he shows up at the funeral viewing to pay his respects, he's in for quite a surprise. Guest stars Eugene Roach, Misty Rowe, and Robert F. Lyons. Written by Robert Bloch.
Makeup.
Down-and-out Patty buys the makeup case that once belonged to legendary actor Lamont Tremaine, now deceased. When he discovers by applying the makeup he can literally become Tremaine's old movie characters, he gets himself into trouble when he heads out to get back at an old boss that screwed him on a deal. The twist is the final character he becomes is the Invisible Man, walking away presumably naked with makeup case and plane ticket to a new life in hand. Guest stars Billy Crystal, Brian Dennehy, Sean Barbara Allen, Senia Hasso, Robert O'Reilly, and Jack Crucian. Written by Jeffrey Bloom, based on the story titled Makeup by Robert R. McCammon, first published in 1981. This is the only teleplay credited to Bloom, who also served as executive story consultant for the series. This also seemed to be the only Darkroom story without a dark ending, leaving matters open-ended and even upbeat. You might note the episode is remarkably similar to Monsters' episode, The Legacy, which aired 7 years later, also involving a haunted makeup case belonging to a dead legendary actor that comes into the possession of a man who found he could become the actor's old movie characters. That was based on a story by Robert Bloch called The Cheney Legacy, first published in 1986. Episode 5, December 25th, 1981.
Places are kind of scary at night, aren't they?
Just follow behind me.
Tonight, 3 chilling stories from the Darkroom.
Get me out of this place!
We communicate with flowers, telepathically.
Mrs. Michelson!
She's the witch.
The Partnership.
A biker passing through a tiny town is lured by an old man to a rundown funhouse on the edge of the lake to meet his oft-mentioned, mysterious partner that nobody has ever seen. But behind the peeling paint and funhouse scares, something hungry waits. Guest stars David Carradine, Pat Buttram, and Carol Cook. Written by Christopher Crowe, based on a story by William F. Nolan. This is the only teleplay credited to Crowe, who, as we'll see, served as a producer on the show.
Daisies.
A botanist who has been sleeping with his assistant has created a machine that lets people hear the thoughts of flowers. When he demonstrates his machine to his wife, the daisies have a very interesting story to tell her. Guest stars Lloyd Bachner, Rue McClanahan, and Elizabeth Halliday. Written by Peter S. Fischer, based on a story by Frederick Brown.
Catnip.
Local troublemaker Ronnie runs afoul of an old neighborhood woman and her black cat. But when the woman turns out to be a witch and the cat her familiar, Ronnie finds out just what happens when you make yourself the mouse. Guest stars Cyril O'Reilly, Lynn Carlin, Michael V. Gazzo, and Jocelyn Brando. Written by Robert Bloch. The night before this Christmas Day 5th episode of 3 Darkly Ironic Tales aired, the production team was informed by ABC that their show was being canceled, and only 3 episodes in the can would be aired, far short of the 13-episode commitment ABC had promised. Producer Peter Fischer wasn't pleased. While admitting the ratings had been awful, he wished the network had been more patient. He noted, "Then ABC is going to have to come up with a really big payoff, because we had a commitment for 13 shows." Episode 6, January 8th, 1982.
Tonight, 2 chilling stories from the Darkroom.
You're ready to execute sentence upon your prisoner.
It's essential that the work on this translation be kept secret.
It is the curse of Achen Marat.
We must know what secret made him the most powerful king in all of history.
Lost in translation.
Dr. Paul Hudson hires a new assistant in the archaeology lab to translate an ancient scroll that contains instructions for a magic potion that diminishes one's enemies. However, Hudson will discover the assistant made a tiny error in translation. Guest stars Andrew Prine, Whit Bissell, Michael Zand, and Cindy Garvey. Written by Michael Sheff and Mary Ann Cassica. The husband and wife writing team were writers on Mrs. Columbo, Tales of the Gold Monkey, Hotel, and story editors on Heart to Heart and Tucker's Witch, among other series.
Guillotine.
In 1875 Paris, a guilty man sentenced to death schemes with his lover to poison the executioner to exploit a legal loophole that would free him. But in the shadow of the guillotine, he learns that even in matters of death, timing is everything. Guest stars Patty D'Arbanville, Frank M. Bernard, and Michael Constantine. Written by Peter Allen Fields. Story by Cornell Woolrich. Fields, a lawyer-turned-writer, cut his teeth on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. before moving on to The Rat Patrol, McCloud, and The $6 Million Man. But he is perhaps best known for writing episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, including highly rated episode The Inner Light, as well as writing numerous episodes of Deep Space Nine, on which he also became a producer. Fields died in 2019 at age 84. This one was filmed at Universal backlot location Tower of London, named after the 1939 film it was constructed for. It has been used for Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, Voyagers, and other films and TV series. Episode 7, January 15th, 1982.
Tonight, 3 chilling stories from the Darkroom.
You scared the life out of me, do you know that?
That's the way I planned it.
It was found in the ruins of an old castle in Italy. There's something in the box that explains all that. And to think it's only $2,000 or $3,000 a swallow.
Get inside. Go on.
Exit line.
Hungry young theater actor Dan Burrows keeps harassing a theater critic after her harsh review. But when he breaks into her apartment to give her a personal performance, things go horribly wrong. Guest stars Samantha Eggar, Jack Carter, Ann Lockhart, and Stan Shaw. Written by Peter S. Fischer, story by William Link and Richard Levinson.
Who's there?
Steve finds out upstairs neighbor Barry plans to murder his wife Claire after he discovers she's being unfaithful with his boss. But unknown to Barry, Claire is downstairs spending the night with Steve. 2 lovers, a jealous husband, and a single flight of stairs. What will be Claire's fate in the Darkroom? Guest starring Grant Goodeve, Diane Kay, and Michael Limbeck. Written by Brian Clemens. The prolific British writer had written for both feature films and television in the 1950s, including numerous episodes of The Vice, a Playhouse-style anthology where people were caught in a fate created by their own deeds, as well as TV series like The Avengers. And you might remember some of his film titles: The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, The Watcher in the Woods, and Highlander 2, The Quickening. Well, they can't all be winners.
The rarest of wines.
Well-off ne'er-do-well Freddie is upset his deceased mother only left him the house and estate, but not her company. That was left to his more responsible sister, Pamela. When he starts selling off pieces of the estate simply to spite her, he begins buying expensive wine with the money. But it turns out that one of the bottles contained much more than Freddie bargained for. Guest starring Judith Chapman and Henry Pollock II. Written by Gerald K. Siegel. Apart from his TV contributions, Siegel is an enigma. Apart from Darkroom, he wrote episodes of Salvage 1, Hotel, and 9 installments of Murder, She Wrote. The stately mansion seen in this episode was none other than the same house that doubled as the governor's mansion on Benson, a sprawling 10-bedroom, 15,000-square-foot estate on South Oakland Avenue in Pasadena, California. Built in 1914, the home has become one of Hollywood's favorite backdrops, appearing in everything from Columbo and Barnaby Jones to American Gigolo, Freddy's Nightmares, and more recently, HBO's True Blood. In real life, the property is known as the Bundy House, named for its original owner, Harlow Bundy, an inventor and industrialist who built the mansion in 1914 as a place to enjoy his retirement. Bundy was the man behind the invention of the employee time clock, a device that would forever change the modern workplace. Sadly, he would enjoy his Millionaire's Row estate for only a little over a year before time unexpectedly ran out for him at age 60. His company, however, lived on through sales and mergers. You know it as none other than IBM. So the next time you punch in at work, think of Harlow Bundy and his grand mansion. A silent reminder that even the man who gave us the time clock couldn't keep his own time from running out.
Darkroom will continue in a moment.
For 20 years, the portal has been closed. It is about to be reopened. This is a detour, a twist in time, a curve of space. Journey into man's imagination with America's most fantastic storytellers. Coming soon to CBS, all new tales from the Twilight Zone.
Behind the scenes.
Darkroom had been the brainchild of producer William Sackheim, who envisioned an anthology series framed by a photographer, spinning tales related to photos as they were being developed, which is more or less what we got. Sackheim had been a screenwriter for Columbia in the late 1940s, cranking out such light-hearted fare as Let's Go Steady, My Dog Rusty, and Personality Kid. After a decade of film writing, he made the transition to television, writing some, but mainly producing, Celebrity Playhouse and the Alcoa and Goodyear theaters. Then it was silly 60s sitcoms like Gidget and The Flying Nun, before getting serious in the 70s with legal dramas, The Bold Ones, The Protectors, and Del Vecchio, as well as wartime miniseries Once an Eagle. By 1981, he had taken his Darkroom concept to producer Peter S. Fischer, who was able to sell it to a very hungry ABC. Born in 1935, Fischer studied drama at Johns Hopkins University and performed in summer stock theater, but discovered he was not an actor and wanted to become a writer, as he said in a YouTube interview with Grove Point Press in 2011. But he did not come to this decision until his mid-30s, after serving in the Army and working various jobs to support his new family. When living on Long Island and publishing a magazine called Sports Car News, his younger brother Jeff was a casting director at Universal. Fischer got the idea to write a spec script for a movie, which he sent to his brother. As Fischer continued the story, he got it to a producer who got it to Barry Diller, who was the head of ABC Movies of the Week. And he got it to Aaron Spelling. Everybody knows who Aaron Spelling is. And the next thing you know, they're making my movie, and I'm in the movie business. Well, it was not quite that easy. First, Jeff had him fix the formatting style, which was completely wrong for a Hollywood script. But the script indeed became a 1971 ABC Movie of the Week with Michael Cole and Janet Margolin called The Last Child, a speculative fiction film that dealt with overpopulation in the future, where couples are limited to one child per family and life-extending medical care is withheld once people turn 65. Soon, he was contributing episodes for Marcus Welby, MD, Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law, Macmillan and Wife, and Columbo, where he was hired on as story editor, creating a lasting relationship with creators William Link and Richard Levinson. NBC then picked up his series, The Eddie Capra Mysteries, and following Darkroom, they also bought Black's Magic with Hal Linden and Harry Morgan. But the crown jewel of his resume came in 1984 with Murder, She Wrote for CBS. Following his career, he enjoyed 15 years of retirement before his death in 2023 at age 88. Robert F. O'Neill served as Darkroom's line producer, overseeing the show's financial and logistical issues. No small task for a series assembled under extreme time pressure. A Hollywood native born in 1921, O'Neill's discipline and precision were forged long before he ever stepped onto a studio lot. As an Army staff sergeant during World War II, he landed on D-Day and fought through both the Battle of Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge, experiences that shaped the strength and focus he later brought to television production. After the war, O'Neill built his career from the ground up, beginning as a production assistant on Dr. Kildare in 1962. He soon moved into associate producer roles on Mission Impossible and The Name of the Game. By the early 1970s, he had joined Columbo, where he likely first encountered Peter S. Fischer. The two men would form a long-running partnership that carried from Darkroom through Murder, She Wrote, earning O'Neill a 1974 Emmy for Columbo and back-to-back Golden Globes in 1985 and 86 for Murder, She Wrote. O'Neill's colleagues remembered him as a man whose quiet faith and deep integrity guided everything he did. Actor Ron Masek, who worked with him for over 2 decades on Murder, She Wrote, recalled, "His faith came through in his work ethic. He had a hearty laugh, and he always brought warmth to the set." Still, O'Neill remained humble. His Emmy and Golden Globes sat not in a glass case, but on top of the family room television. He retired in 1996, and when he passed away in 2007, at age 86, he left a quiet but indelible mark on television history. Christopher Crowe, who served as a writer and producer on Darkroom, brought an unusually eclectic background to the show. A Wisconsin native, Crowe's early passions were split between engines and artistry. After college, he wrote for National Speed Sports News, covering the world of auto racing, a sport in which he participated himself as both driver and mechanic. He later learned graphic design at his father's company, where his creative instincts led him to design a logo for a rock band he admired from their many tri-state performances, a band known as Cheap Trick. Crowe's road to Hollywood began at Universal Television, where he wrote episodes of The Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries, before co-creating the trucking adventure series BJ and the Bear, alongside Glenn Larson. One of his early screenplays, purchased for $50,000, became the 1981 science fiction film The Last Chase, starring Lee Majors, a dystopian tale of a future America where cars are outlawed and a rebellious ex-race driver roars toward free California in a forbidden Porsche 917 Can-Am.
In the year 2011, it was their perfect world, but there was no room for heroes.
Have him brought in.
There was no room for freedom. And now, It was time to run.
Blow that jerk's card.
The Last Chase.
Following Darkroom, Crowe continued to straddle television and film with remarkable success. He served as executive producer of the 1985 revival of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and later created TV series including B.L. Stryker, The Untouchables, and the UPN sci-fi thriller 7 Days. His film work includes writing credits on The Last of the Mohicans, Fear, and The Bone Collector. Today, retired in Indianapolis, Crowe has returned to his first love, cars. Surrounded by tools, chassis, and roaring engines, he spends his time assembling and driving custom-built race cars, trading the writer's room for the driver's seat. Host James Coburn brought instant gravitas to Darkroom, a man whose voice could chill a room as easily as his grin could disarm it. A UCLA drama student who later trained under legendary acting coach Stella Adler in New York, Coburn's lanky frame and rugged charm made him a natural for TV westerns of the late 1950s. His feature film debut came in the Randolph Scott western Ride Lonesome in 1958, playing the sidekick to Pernell Roberts' Outlaw. 2 years later, he broke through in John Sturges' The Magnificent Seven, later returning to work with Sturges on The Great Escape. From there, Coburn became one of Hollywood's distinctive leading men, headlining the suave spy spoofs Our Man Flint and In Like Flint, before tackling grittier roles in Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Cross of Iron, and ensemble films like Midway and Golden Girl. By the early 1980s, however, Coburn's work had slowed. He was battling rheumatoid arthritis, a painful condition that nearly ended his career. As he explained to journalist Eirik Knudsen, "For psychosomatic and psychological reasons, my arms, legs, and shoulders felt like tremendous toothaches with the slightest movement. It was brought on by years of bad habits, eating, drinking, smoking, carrying on, plus working on a film that the director was maliciously destroying, and an 18-year marriage I didn't want anything to do with anymore." Filming Darkroom segments proved to be a relative rest from his regular film work. As Coburn told NEA columnist Dick Kleiner, "It only takes maybe a week a year to do all the intros I have to do. They'll come to wherever I'm working to do them. That's in my contract. It's also in my contract that if I want to act in some of them or direct some of them, I can do that too. I may direct, but I doubt I'll ever act in them, because it would be very hard to segue from the hosting thing to actually appearing in one of the episodes." In time, Coburn's health improved somewhat, and with it came a late career renaissance. In 1997, he earned the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of Nick Nolte's abusive father in Affliction. Even into his 70s, he remained prolific, appearing in 14 more films, including The Man from Elysian Fields, Texas Rangers, and Snow Dogs, until his death in 2002 at the age of 74. As noted earlier, Darkroom was produced at breakneck speed. Some scripts for the show's shorter segments were finalized barely 3 weeks before broadcast, a testament to just how last-minute ABC's series order truly was. One of the first things many viewers notice is how closely the show's framing device mirrored Night Gallery. Like Rod Serling's creepy museum of paintings, Darkroom used photographs developing in the dark as its gateway into each tale, a clever but undeniably similar device that invited comparisons to the earlier series. Yet, Darkroom faced a challenge beyond this creative déjà vu: network promotion. ABC's marketing department routinely spoiled the show's scares and twists in their on-air teasers and promos. This caused Coburn himself to express frustration, later recalling,
"You can't do that with mystery shows. ABC used to love to tell the audience what was going to happen. Then the viewers wouldn't be surprised. It just blows the whole show. There's no reason to watch the damn thing."
Executive producer Peter S. Fischer added additional commentary on show production years later in interviews for the Sci-Fi Channel, noting the writing team aimed for variety in tone and structure.
"Some of it is science fiction, and some of it is suspense, and some of it is horror. We always like to think of it as a little O. Henry, with the twist endings. We like to always come up with some big surprise, and some of them we succeeded quite well, I think. Others maybe not so well. But we always were in there giving it our best shot. The thing that was great about Darkroom was that if it was a story that could be told in 6 minutes, then you tell it in 6 minutes, and you don't try and stretch it to half an hour."
Fischer compared Darkroom's storytelling approach to his later hit, Murder, She Wrote, noting that even in the darkest tales, there had to be more than just a scare.
"There's got to be something that's deeply rooted in humanity. That doesn't necessarily mean it's sweet, but it's rooted in humanity."
Producer Robert F. O'Neill added that Fischer's touch always included a thread of irony.
"I think you'll notice with Peter's writings there's always this sense of humor. He's very modest about it, but you always have that something. You get a chuckle."
Behind the camera, the creative team faced a constant tug-of-war with ABC's Standards and Practices Department. Fischer recalled that the network initially bought the show believing they were getting something akin to Friday the 13th or Halloween.
"They had asked us to deliver Friday the 13th. We had given them Friday the 13th with several of the scripts. As soon as the censors saw the scripts, they said, 'Oh my goodness, you can't do that.' We had to compromise on the gory aspects, if you will, of the show, which in effect, I guess, was good for it, because when you can't rely on that, then you've got to rely on other things, like a little wit, and a little humor, and a little style, and a little surprise, and all the other things that you can do."
This led to one of the more interesting things I found, a darkroom legend, as it were. The rumor was that ABC had rejected several completed episodes for being too intense, which were later supposedly repackaged into the 1983 theatrical film Nightmares. The truth was close, but not quite that sinister. In reality, producers Andrew Mirisch and Alex Beaton developed a separate TV movie pilot for NBC, presumably titled Nightmares, intended as the launchpad for a new half-hour anthology for the fall 1983 season. The film included 4 segments, 3 written by Darkroom's Christopher Crowe and 1 by Jeffrey Bloom, and was directed by veteran filmmaker Joseph Sargent, perhaps best known for Colossus: The Forbin Project and The Taking of Pelham 123. NBC ultimately passed on the project entirely, declining even to air it as a standalone telefilm. Undeterred, Universal re-edited the material for theatrical release, filming new violent scenes to earn an R rating. Released in 1983 as Nightmares, the film featured Emilio Estevez, Christina Rains, Lance Henriksen, Richard Macer, and Veronica Cartwright. It grossed just under $7 million at the box office and was largely forgotten, but left behind a great trailer, narrated by the legendary Percy Rodriguez.
Somewhere between the real and the unreal.
According to the legend, das Teufelnagetier cannot be destroyed.
Between the world of daylight and the dark of night.
I am the Bishop of Battle, master of all I survey.
Between the peaceful sleep of dreams. In the endless sleep of death lies the realm of nightmares. Each summer, one film opens that you've never heard of and that you will never forget. Nightmares is this year's sleeper.
The death and afterlife of Darkroom.
Of all the obstacles Darkroom faced, the deadliest wasn't in the script, it was on the schedule. ABC chose to premiere the show on Friday nights at 9/8 Central. Strike one, Friday night. Strike two, that time slot. Because at the same time on CBS, another show was on. Yes, television's #1 show at the time, a cultural juggernaut watched by more than 80 million people a week. A brand new horror anthology didn't stand a chance. In truth, Darkroom joined a long list of genre series that ABC and NBC would later march into the Dallas time slot for execution. The Phoenix, Manimal, The Master, Blue Thunder, V the Series, Street Hawk, Misfits of Science, Max Headroom, The Highwayman, and Something Is Out There. All casualties of the nighttime soap's rating dominance. By July of 1982, ABC experimented with a different night and time for summer reruns, moving Darkrooms to Thursday night at 8/7 Central. But this time the competition was Magnum PI, and once again, Darkroom was swiftly buried under stronger ratings. Still, the show refused to stay dead. Somewhat surprisingly, Darkroom found new life in syndication on the USA Network and later on the Sci-Fi Channel, which even added new interview bumpers with producers Peter S. Fischer and Robert F. O'Neill, which you already heard quotes from. Like many American series of its era, Darkroom also traveled abroad, airing in the UK, Ireland, Germany, and Australia, likely among other countries. In Germany, 9 of the original 16 segments were edited together into 2 television specials, under the title Mein Schwarze Stunde, My Dark Hour, with actor Karl-Heinz Schroth replacing James Coburn as host. The specials aired in November 1984. Darkroom's eerie tales reborn with a distinctly European flavor. Darkroom has never received an official home video release in the United States. A Region 4 DVD from boutique label Madman Entertainment surfaced in 2010, covering Australia and Latin America, but it's long out of print, and now nearly impossible to find. For a time, the show streamed on NBC.com, but when that content migrated to Peacock in 2020, Darkroom vanished once again into the shadows. Darkroom had also found a life on YouTube, until the entire run was quietly pulled down, banished once more to the digital graveyard, where so many lost shows now rest in peace. But all episodes, at least currently, can be found on the Internet Archive, and I would highly recommend using the download option to save them to your media hard drive while they are available. In a way, Darkroom was the missing link between the macabre storytelling of old-time radio and the new wave of television horror that followed. The format of short, twisty tales, each with a dark ending, had been perfected decades earlier by the likes of Lights Out, Inner Sanctum, and Suspense. These were stories designed to unsettle listeners' imaginations in the dark, where every creak of the house could be part of the story. Television merely gave those shadows form. In the wake of Darkroom, the networks returned to the vaults, reviving classics like The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and bringing new series like Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories to prime time. In their own way, each show drew from the same well of fantastic morality tales that had first haunted the airwaves half a century earlier. But it was on cable television that the genre found true freedom. HBO's The Hitchhiker in 1983 went where network TV dared not, exploring psychological horror, violence, and sexuality in a way completely unbound by broadcast standards. For the first time, horror on television could be as disturbing and explicit as the R-rated films that inspired it. While the networks offered more tame entries in the anthology genre, it was first-run syndication that became the new frontier of televised fear. George Romero's Tales from the Dark Side and its successor, Monsters, delivered weekly chills straight to your local station, bypassing the TV networks entirely. Their success unleashed a wave of imitators. Friday the 13th, the series, Freddy's Nightmares, each pushing the limits of what television horror could show. And then came Tales from the Crypt on HBO. Gory, darkly funny, and utterly unshackled by censors, it reveled in the kind of blood, sex, and wicked humor that broadcast TV could only dream of. Years earlier, Darkroom had inspired rumors that certain film segments were deemed too intense for ABC broadcast. But Freddy's Nightmares faced a similar fate in reality. Episodes shot with scenes so violent or sexual they had to be trimmed before airing. Even though ostensibly produced for late-night TV, the syndication sales departments were said to have assured local stations these shows would play quite well in prime time. But advocacy groups were quick to strike back. The National Coalition on Television Violence launched campaigns against Freddy's Nightmares and Friday the 13th, the series in particular, calling them the most violent shows on television for 2 years running. With no network executives to pressure, the group instead targeted advertisers, drawing headlines, outrage, and naturally, even more curious viewers. But before Freddy cracked jokes or the Crypt Keeper cackled, Darkroom and others had already opened the door and shown just how much shadow could fit between the frames of network television. And while the lights may have gone out on Darkroom after just 7 episodes, its reflection lingered in every twist ending, every whispered moral, every flicker of horror that was to follow. And so we leave the dark room, that shadowed space between light and memory, where every image told a story, and every story hid something it shouldn't. From the whispered terrors of the witch's tale to the flickering nightmares of 1980s television, the horror anthology has never truly died. It simply waits in the dark for someone brave enough to turn the dial and find it again. Until next time, turn out your lights. Next time on Forgotten TV, rewind to 1985 to meet a team of super-powered slackers, misunderstood geniuses, and one very frozen blue guy. From series creator James Perriott comes a story of science gone spectacularly sideways. Misfits of Science. Power up your lab equipment and start the ice cream truck, because on the next Forgotten TV, we'll uncover the show's secret origin story, find out just what is the deal with that theme song, and examine why this cult favorite still isn't on DVD. Charge up those earbuds and get ready for Misfits of Science.
Discover the legendary Q106.5 in your car, on your smart speaker, on your phone. Browse to Q1065.com. 80s, 90s. This is a radio station with a vibe. Download our app or listen online. Search at Q1065 Radio on social media. The Q is your favorite radio station. Discover Q106.5 and hear the 80s and 90s hits on the radio station with personality. Q106.5.
Forgotten TV is a listener-supported podcast and currently contains no paid advertising. If you find value in these episodes, in the articles I write, or in the daily TV spotlight posts on social media, please feel free to support Forgotten TV on Patreon, PayPal, or Buy Me a Coffee. I've been between jobs this year, and there are real costs that go into keeping the podcast and website running. Hosting, buying and subscribing to research materials, and production tools. It's your support that keeps Forgotten TV going. Forgotten TV is brought to you by executive producers Joshua Driscoll, Doc Pinko, K.L. Young, Kenny Siegel, Tony Cook, and James Bellinger. With producers Julio Capa, Ron Sorrell, Trevor Pearson, Tim Yabo, Eric Fusco, Lee Goldberg, Ralph Carasillo, and John Malcolm. And of course, thanks to all who support at the $1 to $3 levels. Please be sure to at least follow for free on Patreon to keep up with all things Forgotten TV. Forgotten TV is not affiliated with or authorized by Universal Television, ABC, Paramount Global, or any production company or network involved in the making of any TV show or film mentioned in this podcast. Links to Amazon are affiliate, and as an Amazon associate, Forgotten TV earns royalties from qualifying purchases made. All characters, films, and series mentioned are the property of their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended. Audio clips are included for the purposes of historical context, review, commentary, and criticism only, and are not intended to infringe. Additional audio used under license by Epidemic Sound. If you need music for your podcast or YouTube channel, check out Epidemic Sound, link in the show notes. This podcast is copyright 2025 Forgotten TV Media. The views and opinions expressed by guests and quoted sources are their own and may not reflect the opinion of Forgotten TV Media, its patrons, or any future sponsors. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. Information presented is based on a combination of interviews, period news media, books and magazine articles, and high-quality online sources. While reasonable effort has been made to include only factual information, Forgotten TV Media cannot guarantee the accuracy of every detail included and makes no representations or warranties for the content in this podcast and cannot be held liable for errors or omissions. And I'd like to thank those YouTube channels for making some of the audio possible.
TARDIS and Beyond, Shoutier, Nikola Tesla Wireless Radio, Retro Radio, Old Time Radio, Michael Deegan, Old Time Radio Researchers, Pat Champneys, Old Time Radio Archive, The Whistler Channel and Podcast, The Classic Archives Old Time Radio Channel, Sleazy Movie Prod, Matt's Productions 12, David Gideon, Florin MC, Great Hall 75, TV Themes Topic, KJ Norman, Grindhouse Movie Trailers, HD Film Tributes, Scream Factory TV, Danny's Music Playlists, Mal Jardine, Mondo Digital, Movie and Video Game TV Spots.
Sources of quotes and background information came from the following. On the Air, the Encyclopedia of Old Time Radio by John Dunning. Broadcasting Magazine, October 19, 1981. Terror Television, American Series 1970 to 1999 by John Kenneth Muir. And content from the following online sources. The Old Time Radio Catalog, RadioHorrorHosts.com, Remind Magazine, Television Obscurities, Flapper Press, Micro Brew Reviews, the WGA Directory, The Hollywood Reporter, Variety, the Grove Point Press YouTube channel. Thank you for listening. Be sure and bookmark forgotten.tv for all content and links. I am your writer, producer, and host, Chris Cooling. And this has been Forgotten TV.
That's all the television there is.